it is very much a collaborative group process. There are group meetings where we come to consensus on our different ratings. There's so much support from ONS staff, even amongst our different groups, even when you're assigned to one peer reviewer. Let's say you go on vacation. Sometimes we're paired with other people too. So there is some flexibility in the opportunity as well that I wanted to let other people know.
You're listening to the ONS Podcast, where ONS Voices Talk Cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Hello, and welcome to the ONS Podcast. I'm your host, Jaime Weimer, Manager of Oncology Nursing Practice at ONS. And today we're talking with Holly Tenaglia, lecturer at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, about what it's like to develop symptom intervention resources with ONS. Thanks so much for joining us today, Holly.
Glad to be here.
So before we get started, I wanted to briefly give some context for our listeners. So today we're going to discuss an important tool that's available on our newly redesigned website called the Symptom Intervention Resources. You can access this from the website through the Clinical Tools top menu. Access does require registration on our website, which is free. So if you're a member, you ever purchased a book or a course, you already have this account. If you don't, it only takes about 2 minutes to register for this free access. The symptom intervention resources have historically been known and perhaps are still informally called PEP, or Putting Evidence into Practice. This resource has previously been available in book form. Some of us might remember the reference cards that came on a key ring. So these resources are still available. They still exist, but they're now accessible and maintained through some routine updates on our website. So now that we have that covered, Holly, can you introduce yourself and tell us briefly about your role in oncology nursing and how you got involved with ONS?
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So I've been in oncology nurse for about 10 years in a variety of settings. And my involvement with ONS actually started for me while I was getting my master's and kind of trying to figure out that next step. So I started with small things that I felt comfortable with, like scholarship and abstract reviews. And honestly, since then, I've expanded to a lot of different opportunities with ONS, and I was really privileged to be part of this symptom intervention resource group as well.
So how did you first learn about volunteer opportunities for the peer reviewing of the symptom intervention resources?
So I found this specific opportunity through just those ONS emails. It amazes me how many opportunities they have there. Each time there's a new email, I sift through them and see if it's something that I'm interested in and that I could give that time to.
That's wonderful. And I think that's a good point. I know we all get a million newsletters in our email,
Yes.
but when you stop and read them, there's lots of great information there. Even if you can't click through and follow the links immediately, just knowing that that information is shared in those weekly update emails, just important for our members and our listeners to know that, hey, if you are interested, scroll down a little bit, check out some of the links, and you might find stuff that you think is interesting too.
Yes. And if you see the link the first time and you're kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if I should apply now, luckily we see them multiple times in the email blast.
Absolutely. And for members, the volunteer opportunities are technically housed on our ONS Communities platform. So that's where the link will lead you. So if you're browsing the communities already, you might find yourself and wander into the volunteer opportunities just to kind of keep an eye on what's available and what's closing soon. So tell us just a little bit about what that experience was like with the application, the selection process. How long did it take? And what steps did you go through to be selected for this role?
First, like I said, I found the opportunity on the ONS website. I submitted the application. Super easy. It obviously asks background questions, what kind of skills you think you bring, and why you want to be part of the opportunity. After that, I heard from the team probably within a few weeks of the call closing. And then once I was selected, what they did was they had an introductory session for any of us that were new and kind of explained what the process would be during the whole process of developing the resource.
That's great. And as you described, it's usually fairly simple. It's usually just a single application, perhaps sometimes requesting things like a CV attachment or other things, depending on what the opportunity is. But we do try to make that application simple. My comment I would add is before I joined staff here at ONS, I did a couple of volunteer opportunities myself. And I remember thinking, there's absolutely no way they'll pick me. There's going to be thousands of people applying for this. How would I ever? Now I'm on this side. I can tell you that is not true. So truly know that if you are interested in an opportunity, we will see your application. We will see it and we will review it, because I think everyone has that thought. And so then nobody applies. So don't sell yourself short by thinking that everybody else will be chosen but you. We want everyone, every experience level, to consider how participating in ONS volunteer opportunities can be valuable for your experience. So thanks for describing your experience for us.
Thank you. And I do just want to echo the message that you just gave, Jaime, actually, just because I've done some other opportunities. What I've really valued from ONS is that ONS really does strive to bring a variety of skill sets to the different opportunities. So like you said, being quote unquote less experienced than others does not keep you from giving your time and energy to ONS at all.
Absolutely. And you will see if you look at any of the openings, we do try to describe some of the requirements and things, which we'll talk a little bit about later in this episode. But, if there are certain experience levels or, certain specific criteria that we want volunteers to have, we do describe those on the application. So we just try to be very transparent. But as you said, we try to include opportunities for all experience levels, because everyone has something they can share and information they can give to help make the things that we create for oncology nurses all the better. So we welcome, as you said, all experience levels. If you're interested, then we want to hear from you. So for those not as familiar with the role that you took for this project, what exactly does that entail? And can you explain how the development of symptom management and symptom intervention resources, how can that be beneficial for oncology nurses?
So as far as the process, the role that I had in this opportunity was I served as a peer reviewer for the symptom intervention resource. Specifically, the two that I have worked on were chemotherapy-induced diarrhea, and then in this cycle, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. And essentially what they do is they pair you with another reviewer, and about every 2 weeks, you guys use a standardized tool to evaluate an article. And you go through this depending on just how much evidence is out there. There are some topics that may have less evidence that has come out in the past 5 years. And then as you and your teammate go through all this evidence, at the end of all of the reviewing of the evidence, you get together as a team. And once again, we use a standardized tool to evaluate our recommendations, whether or not we would recommend the for practice, whether the evidence just truly is kind of inconclusive at the moment, or if potentially we would not recommend the intervention that was reviewed during that time period. As far as how it would help oncology nurses, we try to make it honestly simpler by doing the legwork of reviewing the evidence, synthesizing what the rating of the evidence and what it means. And then as you'll see on the symptom intervention resource, you'll see kind of a snapshot of what our recommendations are for applying it to practice.
Thank you for describing that. And again, for those that have not visited our website and seen how these are now laid out with our new website update, it's really great. It's easy to search. You can filter by certain interventions, certain symptoms. And so finding the information like that you described, Holly, and being able to also see the detail of the work that you're doing, understanding what were all the articles that were reviewed, how were they sort of evaluated, what was that criteria, that methodology. If you're interested, it's there. If you just want to go straight to tell me what works or what was more likely to work versus what we shouldn't be doing, all of that information is very clearly presented as well. So, but interesting. And thank you for sharing kind of what the background of that looks like. So what part of this volunteer role, I know you've had several, but what part of this volunteer role have you found the most rewarding, both personally and professionally?
So I will say from a professional standpoint that it really helps me hone in my skill on analyzing the evidence. So as far as backgrounds, I am a clinical nurse specialist, and now that I work in academia, this is a very important skill for me to build and have in my profession. Also, those group meetings that we have, I've really appreciated being able to learn from others and then being able to teach that to others. So in this second round, for example, the thing that I've really enjoyed personally is actually being able to mentor somebody that maybe hasn't done it as often, and just being able to watch them grow and improve in their skills while you provide feedback and guidance. And honestly, on a side note, it's really great to meet a lot of people in ONS that you've, for example, seen their names in CJON, and you finally get to meet them personally in our group meetings. So it's a great networking opportunity to connect with some great people in ONS too.
I couldn't agree more. I think As you mentioned, it's an opportunity not only to contribute to important work or something that you find personally, professionally interesting, but it also opens the door to get to know other people who are doing this work. And, those connections can spark future collaborations. You might cross paths at another event or another volunteer opportunity. So it really does just help to build those connections and bring those names to life, as you mentioned, those that you see that everyone contributes in different ways. And I think this is a great way to use those skills. As you mentioned, critical appraisal is like a muscle. And if you don't use it, it atrophies a little bit. But you're right. This is an opportunity that allows you to not only flex those muscles, but then be able to share that information and mentor others. So
yes,
what a great opportunity.
And I will give Carolyn and Carrie just kudos on how they have streamlined the process. So obviously they send out the articles that they would like us to review because they've gone through that 5-year search of the evidence. But then the tools that they allow us to use are very streamlined and easy. They're very reachable too if we have any questions, but they've made the process really easy for us.
A well-deserved shout out for Caroline Clark and Carrie Moriarty, our fearless leaders in the evidence-based practice department of our organization. So they do outstanding work, as you said, try to keep very organized, keep things structured so that this very complicated work can be distilled into meaningful information that we can share. So in your experience, how does this kind of work contribute to oncology nursing, the profession as a whole? And do you see it making tangible difference in practice or in patient outcomes?
We do. So as you've touched on, the resources are really accessible. If you just want to know if this intervention will actually help my patient, for instance, like we've talked about, decrease their diarrhea or decrease their nausea and vomiting symptoms, you'll see it right there. But if you'd like to dig into the actual evidence in a more detailed fashion, it's also there for you. So I think it's nice to have that ready access to the resource, but if you'd like the extra information, it's there too. It's also just a great way to allow our nurses to focus on what they do best, which is caring for our patients. And so it's nice that the information is readily available for them to use.
It starts with knowing that it's there and knowing that this is a resource available. So for those listening that this is the first time you've ever heard of it, I sure hope that's not the case. But if it is, really encourage you to check it out and just become familiar with what's available there and consider how you can integrate this tool into your practice, using it to provide the nursing care that you do for your patients. So what qualities or skills do you think a nurse needs to succeed in this type of volunteer role? And is there anything that stands out as particularly important that you think would help them be successful?
So I will say after doing 2 cycles, there are a few things that I've noticed that would be helpful skills to be successful in this. One is just being curious about the evidence. It is amazing to see the results of these different articles, and sometimes they surprise you. They don't exactly give you what you expect. So being curious and open to what's out there is definitely a good skill to have. Secondly, time management is something that I would like to highlight too. So as I've said, we get a new article about every 2 weeks, and this involves about a week for myself and then about a week or less than that for my partner to go through this process as well. So being able to manage your time to afford your partner the time to solidly look through the article as well. And then being able to collaborate and receive feedback from your peers. So while it is helpful to have research skills, as I said, there are a lot of people within the entire group that are able to mentor you along the way and give you feedback. And you just get better with each and every appraisal. It's definitely something that we can build in others if you're open to the opportunity.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. How can nurses, maybe with limited experience in research, critical appraisal, evidence synthesis, how can they prepare for a role like this?
You've touched on it a little bit, Jamie. It is kind of a muscle. So a simple way you can build that muscle, for example, is just starting by reading the evidence as you try to apply it in practice, just simply reading. In addition to that, as you've also pointed out, reading through the symptom intervention resource, it gives you explanations as to why we rate the evidence the way that we do. And it helps you kind of understand the rationale for the different ratings that we gave the evidence. And then the last thing that I would say could be helpful if you have that resource within your work setting is to work with more experienced staff that can assist you, whether that is a nurse educator or advanced practice nurse or another nurse that you view as your role model. They can certainly help you build that muscle that Jamie talked about as well.
And I think it's so important. These are skills that I think most nursing programs include at a fundamental level. But if it's only if it's been a couple of decades since your bachelor's degree or what have you, there's no shame in that. I also am a CNS, and if enough time passes where I don't do this regularly, it's a bit of a reteaching of just reminding myself what I'm looking at, how I'm supposed to think about it. So for any nurse, whatever your level of education is, your level of experience, don't be afraid, don't be ashamed to say I kind of forget how to do this in a formal way. So as you said, I think it's great to reach out to any mentors or peers that are more experienced in this, and even at the place of your employment, just to brush up on these skills, because whether you're using them in this volunteer opportunity or not, I think it's really important to be able to understand and read the literature, read the evidence, and be able to interpret that for patients. What would you tell somebody who is thinking about applying for a volunteer role like this in the future? And do you have any tips or advice for navigating that process?
I will say, quite honestly, what I tell most people is that if you see a volunteer announcement in ONS that piques your interest, go ahead and try. Go ahead and apply if you meet those requirements and it's something that you're passionate about or think that you have skills that you can bring to that process. As far as tips, I don't know if I have concrete tips other than, like I said, making sure that it's something you're passionate about, really having an introspective look at the skills that you could bring. And this third one is hard for most of us that love to be part of ONS and volunteer, but also knowing that you have the time for it. I will say, juggling the different things in life, you also want to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of time to give to these different opportunities as well. And just know that if you miss one opportunity, there will be another one because there's always different things you can do in ONS.
Absolutely. We strive to not only have opportunities for different skill sets, different experience levels, but also different time commitments, because as you mentioned, our lives are busy already. We've got a lot of things going on, home, work, school, life. And so not everyone has hours and hours. Sometimes they only have a few minutes or, intermittent availability. So I would echo everything that you've said. Look closely at the posting. But if you have questions or you want more clarification, there is always listed there sort of who is owning that volunteer opportunity from an ONS staff perspective. And so don't hesitate to reach out directly and ask for more questions if you want to be more clear on what you're signing up for. We try to include as much detail as we can, but sometimes there's space limitations. So we encourage, ask us questions. We are happy to explain in more detail what the opportunity involves. And we want to make sure that you are equipped with all the right information to make your decision as well. Well, Holly, thank you so much for joining us today on this episode. Just a great opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into some of these specific but recurring volunteer opportunities that our members and our audience will see. And I really appreciate your time to describe them in more detail so that hopefully other listeners will hear all of the great work that you're doing and want to join in.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
As we reach the end of our episode, we like to always run through a series of some quick fire questions just to help summarize some of the things we've talked about. So to start that off, how do you think we as nurses should evaluate maybe our hidden or implicit bias when we think about developing symptom interventions with ONS or participating in this type of volunteer opportunity?
I will say for this specific volunteer opportunity, it's been really helpful to use standardized tools. There have been times where the evidence has not given us the results that I think we were assuming we would see. And so while the standardized tools mitigate some of the bias, we do recognize that it won't remove the bias entirely, but it does help make your review more objective.
What are some common misconceptions about developing symptom intervention resources?
I'd say personally, I don't know if I had misconceptions before I was part of the team as much as I just didn't know what the process entailed. I think there were times where the findings were surprising to me. But what I also appreciated was that it was a group effort. So it wasn't just Holly's opinion. It was a group of us that reviewed and were able to collaborate together. So I think that's something that being part of this process has helped me understand, is that it's not just one individual's, but it's a group consensus for the symptom intervention resource.
And I think what that translates to is when people want to know, well, air quotes here, what does ONS say about this?
Mm-hmm.
ONS, it's not the Wizard of Oz. There's not someone behind the curtain. It is what ONS says is a result of the work that you're helping to participate in. Those that help are authors on our guideline books. It is a communal, combined effort of experts and passionate volunteers that help create these documents that ultimately represent what we as an organization say on a lot of different clinical topics. So I think the gravity of that shouldn't be lost in such an important work that you're doing. What's something about this topic that's not often discussed, but you wish people knew more about?
It is very much a collaborative group process. There are group meetings where we come to consensus on our different ratings. There's so much support from ONS staff, even amongst our different groups, even when you're assigned to one peer reviewer. Let's say you go on vacation. Sometimes we're paired with other people too. So there is some flexibility in the opportunity as well that I wanted to let other people know, because honestly, ONS and their staff have been very accommodating throughout this process.
What additional training or education do oncology nurses need to stay current on this topic?
As you've said, just knowing that the resource is available, I think also recognizing that it was the previous PEP resources. And for anybody that hasn't seen them, just knowing that the resource is available.
And what are some additional resources for patients or other healthcare professionals who want to learn more?
I want to say just know that those resources are even there on our ONS clinical website, in that they are, as long as you're a member, they are easily accessible for you.
Absolutely. And even non-members. This one is only registration access. So for other healthcare professionals who are interested in what you're using to help guide some of your symptom interventions, share it with them. We welcome all comers to register for our website. They don't have to be a nurse. We've got some clinically important information to share with our partners in healthcare as well. Well, Holly, thank you again. It's so great to talk to you and just hear about your experience in developing this really important resource for our users, our members. Do you have any final comments to share with our listeners today?
I think I've echoed it through most of this interview, but I really just want to say that ONS is committed to the growth of its members. I've really enjoyed being part of this volunteer opportunities and the other ones that I've been a part of. So truly, if you have a passion for something and you have the skills, ONS would love to have you, and you will meet some of the greatest people in doing these opportunities. I've made some of the best connections and friendships through the volunteer opportunities I've done. So big shout out. You guys know who you are, for some people I love throughout ONS.
Outstanding. Well, Holly, thank you again. It's been great talking with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the ONS Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part in this episode by leaving a review wherever you download your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org and ons.org/voice. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guest and not necessarily ONS.